Hello and welcome to Current Read, the podcast that offers word nerds, bibliophiles, and literature buffs a glimpse into the minds of local and international authors. I'm your host, Sam Herbst, and in our last episode, we chatted with local author and feminist writer Joy Watson about her book, Because I Love You, which explores the quiet and insidious microaggressions that can live inside love. But today we're looking at a louder, perhaps more overt version of love, and the subversion of the Disneyfied script that so many women have grown up with. What happens when your happily ever after suddenly becomes your worst nightmare overnight? What happens when the future you dreamed of disappears at the drop of a hat? What happens when, in the blink of a crinkling eye, you suddenly have to pick up the shards and begin again? Joining me today is award-winning health journalist and editor Eve Simmons, who tackles these questions and so much more in the deeply personal What She Did Next, a book that effortlessly blends memoir and investigative journalism in a way that makes you feel like you're very much part of an informative but equally engaging WhatsApp group chat. Eve Simmons, welcome to TGE's Current Read.
Thank you so much for having me. That was such a lovely introduction.
Oh man, you're very welcome. Look, there's so much that I can say. You are an extremely accomplished journalist and editor. I'm fascinated by all the work that you do. If anybody's not following Eve, obviously we're going to put you in touch with Eve, because besides what she did next, your work as a journalist, Eve, is pretty impressive. And I'm so glad that you stuck to a career as a woman and didn't go into the heady life of just being a mom, although you are a mom, which brings you to South Africa. What are you doing in the country? I'm very excited for you.
Good question. Thank you. So I'm incredibly lucky to be in this very exceptional and beautiful place. I had my baby last year in July, so he's coming up to a year now, which is mind-blowing to me that a year has passed since I pushed out a child.
Yeah. Congratulations, firstly.
Thank you. And my partner works in the film industry, and so is kind of traveling here, there, and everywhere. And I'm very lucky in the UK. We get a really great, many employees of companies get a really great maternity leave package, and I'm lucky to be one of them. So we can take a year off and be paid for the vast majority of that year. And so when it came to deciding what we were going to do, my partner was due to come back to Cape Town to film a show that he's working on at the studios. And we decided that it would be great if me and the baby came with him, because I have the time off work. So I was originally just going to take 6 months off. I couldn't imagine being off work for a year. I've absolutely thrown everything that I have into my job for the past decade, and so couldn't imagine being without it for such a long time. But it seemed to be a no-brainer that we would all kind of stay together in this beautiful place, and we're very lucky that we have done, and it's been absolutely fantastic and kind of really excelled all of my expectations.
Cape Town, yes. What an amazing place to have spent a year of maternity leave. And I agree with you. As a career woman myself and someone very invested in my work, I can really relate. A whole story for another day to chat about the rights of women and what happens kind of to your brain when you have a baby, which I'm sure as a health journalist is something that you'd really be keen on looking into. So I'm happy to chat with you off mic about that, because we really do need to focus on divorce, what happens when the rug gets pulled out from under you. What She Did Next is a memoir, like I said, that blends reportage, and obviously as a journalist you were going to go there. So let's slot our listeners into that. What exactly is What She Did Next all about?
So What She Did Next is, as you very eloquently said, it's part memoir, which is my memoir and the details of my very sudden breakup, which I've termed a blindsiding divorce, and also a look into this, what I found to be is some sort of a trend among mostly millennial aged women who seem to be in long-term relationships, live with someone for a very long time, get married, and then suddenly it all falls apart. And when I was kind of investigating what had happened to me, I was very surprised to find out that I wasn't alone, and that this was something that divorce lawyers and divorce coaches and people in the space were telling me they were seeing more and more often. And then the book kind of explores that phenomena via lots and lots of different women's stories. And the idea behind it was to make sure that we have a real representative cross section of society, and that we give voices to people who have experienced something that lots and lots of people experience, a divorce, but individual circumstances means that it comes with lots of different messiness and details that may not necessarily be explored in the kind of mainstream media, or there might not be a lot of resources there. You might not see that kind of story related. So, God, I'm so sorry.
No stress.
So, for instance, we have explored when divorce happens in a gay marriage, when divorce happens in a Muslim marriage, the phenomena of the get, which is the Jewish wedding certificate, and what happens when a husband refuses to give the wife that, and the knock-on effect, the devastation to her and her children. And there's also a man in there. There's a guy who's talking about his own experience of a blindsiding divorce, and so you get that kind of gender flip perspective. So yeah, I think it was really important for me to look at the topic of divorce, and quite specifically a kind of shock blindsiding divorce, relatively young women, but from all different walks of life, so that anyone could pick up the book and really see themselves in it or take something from it.
I really appreciated that. While you do offer a lens, your own lens, because it's memoir, you're looking at it from a heteronormative perspective. You say this from the beginning, but as you say, just to reiterate, there's gay couples in there. There's the get, which speaks about Jewish marriage, and then there's the nikah, which speaks about Muslim marriage, and all the legislation around it, because we're going to get into that legislation and kind of the dynamics that happen there, the fallacies that you delve into, and debunking certain myths. What I am interested in is from the get-go, you speak about being blindsided, where when I picked up the book, I thought, ooh, you were one of those women. Like, my immediate assumption before reading anything was that you were one of those women who got married and realized, oh, I've made a terrible mistake. But that's not at all what happens. You were blindsided, and you go into what blindsiding is and the kind of statistics around the gender dynamics of who gets blindsided when. So what is blindsided? What happened to you exactly? And is it more men or women that it happens to?
So blindsiding is not a technical term. It's something that's sort of just like colloquial parlance, really. But it means, in this context anyway, breaking up with somebody out of nowhere. So the person being broken up with has absolutely no idea that it's coming. There's perhaps no problems in the relationship, no immediate or obvious problems in the relationship. One party really believes that this is their forever and their safe place, and the other party has a completely different idea about what the future holds. So in my case, I was with my partner for 9 years. We were married for 6 months. We had a very emotional and intense wedding, in that the things that we said to each other were very confessional and vulnerable, and a real kind of outpouring of our love for each other. And we had been through a lot together in our relationship and felt that we were very, very strong. But after 6 months of marriage, my husband came home from work one day and told me that he no longer wanted to be married. Not only that, but he didn't want to be in a relationship anymore. And that took the wind out of my sails completely. It came out of nowhere. I was totally and utterly shocked, and was convinced that he was having some sort of emotional or psychiatric meltdown, and that he would come to his senses within a couple of weeks. So we had this period of about just over a week where he decided what he really wanted, and I said he had to make the decision. And my belief, I think, was that he would come to his senses, and unfortunately that didn't happen. He decided that was it. He didn't want to go to couples counselling. He didn't want to work on the relationship. He was out. And I guess the most kind of shocking thing for me was the change in his attitude and behaviour in a very short space of time. He ended up becoming, for the process of the breakup, becoming a person who I really didn't recognise. And I found that obviously very disturbing and incredibly devastating. But from a journalistic perspective, incredibly interesting that a person could behave in one way and confess to have lots of very powerful and intense feelings about a person for a very long period of time, and then suddenly something happens and that all changes. And I was very interested in the fact that this was a heteronormative relationship, as you said, and it was the man who was responsible for these kinds of changes in behavior. My assumption was that a woman would behave differently. Sorry, I was about to sneeze. My assumption was that women would behave differently, but I was aware that that was maybe a stereotype, and I would think that because all my best friends are women and I love women. And so I just felt there was really a lot to unpick there, which is why I started investigating. But on the kind of more objective side, speaking to divorce lawyers, which I did in the sort of process of my breakup, as well as relationship counselors, psychologists, they all seemed to be saying the same thing, which was when I told them my story, they all said, kind of looked at me with a bit of a knowing nod, as if to say, yes, we're aware of this trend. It happens relatively frequently. We don't understand why. And saying to a journalist, we don't understand why, is like red rag to a bull, because I just was like, right, now I have something to investigate. And off I went. And I guess it was a way of probably distracting me from the absolute turmoil and disaster of my life. But it was also a great way of channeling the pain into something productive that might help other people in the same situation.
I love that, because I can relate from journalist to journalist. There's so many things. I've had the same kind of that red yarn that you're talking about, thinking about why so many people in my circle are getting or have gotten a divorce, and really thinking like, we went to your wedding, guys, just coming from another point of view. We went to your wedding. What happened? But more from a journalistic perspective, trying to piece together kind of the trends that happen. So I've looked at it hormonally, and I've looked at it, so sociologically, that you get to this kind of what if moment, all kind of things that you do also tackle in the book. What I'm interested in is that you were aware of your biases before you came in. And towards the end of the book, there's one, you make an assumption that, of course, when it comes to children and divorce, so I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, but I think it speaks a lot to your writing process, and you also teasing these problems out and figuring things out and putting the puzzle together, as you've so deftly done in the book, is that you made the assumption that, of course, when a couple gets divorced, the woman who was kind of torn apart by this partner would obviously not want her partner to have full access to the children. Was it a psychologist, a psychiatrist, or I
think it was a divorce lawyer,
lawyer that called you out and said, what was the story?
Yeah, so it was, we were talking about a woman who is in the public eye, and the kind of the breakdown of her marriage was in the public eye, and I knew about it. A lot of people knew about it. And it just so happened that this divorce lawyer that I was speaking to worked with her kind of, I think it was with her family, or there was some link with the divorce lawyer and and this couple. And my reaction was, I'm not surprised. I heard about the way that the husband behaved with her. I think he had multiple affairs and it was sort of splashed on the front of newspapers. And I said, the way that he behaved and the way that he treated her was so appalling, and what she went through was so terrible. I'm not surprised. He's a real shitbag. I'm not surprised that she didn't want her children to have anything to do with him. And this divorce lawyer who knows the parties in the case sort of whipped round to me and said, why would you say that? What on earth would the benefit be of that for the children to not see their father? They've not done it. The father hasn't done anything wrong to the children. He has to the mother, in your opinion, but you also don't know what details of that relationship was. And just because somebody behaves badly within a romantic relationship setting, it doesn't mean that they're a bad parent. And I could really see the inner workings of a parent who feels betrayed, let down, very disappointed and heartbroken by their ex-partner, and why it's so easy for all of those emotions to cloud the relationship with the children, and what maybe one parent thinks is appropriate for the children's relationship to be with their other parent. It's very difficult not to let your own feelings about somebody impart onto,
of course,
what you think your children should feel about them. And another divorce lawyer said to me, often an ex-partner is to the other ex-partner, the worst person in the world because of how they've treated them. And they will talk for hours endlessly about how terrible they were in the relationship. And so getting their head around introducing their children, who are the most precious things in their life, to the worst thing in their life is quite difficult to do. And so that's why you have these situations where, unfortunately, the children are kind of used as pawns, or one parent might be incredibly protective of the children when it may not necessarily be in their best interests.
It's such an interesting chapter, and I think children is a big thing with regard to divorce. But you also go into women who haven't had children. It's a large part of your own story, and again, there's just like a lot of things that you cover throughout the book that gives this deep dive into marriage, adulthood. There's a part in it where you mention, the best and most freeing thing for you about your anxiety at the time of not having children is that you don't know, and that you don't know what you don't know, and you can't predict the future. And that became a really freeing thought, where I think it stopped me for a bit in my tracks. It's very early on in the book where you go, well, thank God I never actually had children to deal with when it came to my own divorce. But how is it for you? Frame that for me. How is it for you that it was a freeing idea for you not to know the future?
I think that when you're a very sort of type A person like myself, who likes planning and likes things to be in a certain order, it's very easy to kind of get on that trajectory of, okay, well, I found my person, and then we're going to get married, we're going to live together, and we get married, and then after a year or so we'll get pregnant, and then we'll have children, and you sort of tell yourself that that's going to be your story, maybe because that's just what you've seen, probably because as women we're fed that sort of 2.4 children, woman must be domestic from the day we're born, but you kind of create this idea of what normal is. And I think I very much did that. And I met my partner when I was in my early 20s. So it was very kind of traditional in that we grew up together. And then the next kind of thing that you do is to move in together and then get engaged and then have children. And so when that all collapsed completely out of my control, I was almost grieving for a future that I thought that I was going to have. I had told myself that, well, I was in my early 30s and had stupidly told myself, this means that it probably won't happen now, because the likelihood of me meeting that person and having enough time to build a proper relationship with them and then, maybe get married and then start to have children, I'll be too old. And again, like, these are all beliefs that I had concocted that just were based on absolutely no fact whatsoever, and just kind of born out of fear, really. And so I, as part of my kind of recovery from my breakup, I moved to New York. I was very lucky to get a job offer in New York. So I moved over there for 9 months, completely out of my comfort zone. I knew one person and was totally kind of gobbled up by this ginormous city. And at first was absolutely terrified. And I think this is kind of another reason why I wanted to write the book. There's a lot, when you kind of Google divorce, or you look at the general kind of divorce content, or, if you're in the market for a divorce and you start to look around and read around, a lot of what I found was aimed at women quite a bit older than me. Most of them did have children. And the problems that were kind of being dealt with in this conversation was maybe the division of a lot of assets, possibly a home, maybe a second home, custody agreements, very difficult financial decisions, and things that really were born out of having a very relatively long life with somebody. And there was nothing that I could find that spoke to my situation, which was really, you're just getting started on that life trajectory. And I guess that then what I found was, when I did something like go to New York, I couldn't, and to some extent when I was back in London, I really struggled to find where I fit in, because I no longer, and I've written about this in the book, it's sort of like you're no longer really, you can't just go back to your single self when you were in your early 20s and sort of hang out with all your single friends and go out, like be out at the weekends and be out every Friday night until God knows what time. That doesn't feel right, because you're used to this kind of like life of comfort. And maybe, I wasn't really drinking a lot at the time. I was used to having the odd nice glass of wine with my husband over a steak on a Saturday night, whatever.
You had your things. So, you had your habits and your creature comforts from a marriage, that things that you slide into so easily. That's got nothing to do with the overarching trajectory of the relationship. But on Friday nights we order, Indian food and curry, and you speak a lot about watching Peep Show. That was something I assume that you did with your ex-husband. That was a comfort thing. Yeah. That was a lovely part of your relationship.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, stuff like that. And I guess, the kind of like outer social circle becomes a lot less important. And you just see, it happens when you're in a long-term relationship. You see people less often. And so what happens on the flip side of that is that all the single people kind of create their own worlds and have all their extracurricular stuff that they do and fill their time with fun stuff. And you don't really fit into it anymore. And so I found that really difficult. And then I obviously didn't want to spend all my time with all my friends who were in couples, because that made me feel crap and just reminded me of what I didn't have anymore. So you're kind of like, find yourself a bit rudderless. And I think that at first when I was in New York, I really felt like that. And it was this feeling of, how long is it going to take until I feel like I'm in a place where I have my tribe and I feel comfortable with where I am at this stage of life, without a romantic partner. What does that look like? Because I felt like I had almost sacrificed my whole 20s being in a relationship, and I'd missed the bit of kind of building the life for myself, because me and my partner were so intertwined. And so I guess, in answer to your question, it was only maybe about kind of halfway into my time in New York where it didn't take me very long to build up a life for myself where I felt happy and comfortable and a wonderful circle of women around me, where I sort of realized, well, you know what? There's no way of knowing when I'm going to feel a certain way. And I feel good in myself for now, and that's enough. And it could be that I'm in this stage for 2 years. It could be I'm in this stage for 5 years. And who knows? But as long as I'm content and happy, it doesn't really matter what's next on the horizon. And I think also somebody had said to me, if there's something that you want, so for instance, children, the likelihood is if you really want it, you will have it. It's much more likely if you really want something that you will have it than you won't have it. And I think that gave me quite a lot of peace as well, to know that, you know, it would come. And I had saw it at the time like I'd wasted quite a lot of time with my ex, and I didn't want to waste any more time thinking about what could be. But I think in order to get to that point, you have to sort of go through the motions of finding things really difficult and finding the unknowns and the anxiety quite challenging, and just sitting with it and grappling with it and overcoming it.
I think with the biological clock that women have, you know, that the quote unquote biological clock, because we know that, you know, well into your 40s, you could still be, with privilege, obviously, which is something you also get into in the book. With privilege, you could also be having children at 40 plus, which is a whole other topic to delve into.
Yeah.
But we do have that biological clock. And so I think that's why it's so easy for women. And I'm seeing it among Gen Z women. So I won't necessarily say just millennial women have fallen into the trap. But we fall into the trap of that there's shoulds in our life trajectory, and that after we study, or if you're still married, if you're still with your high school sweetheart, marry him, be with that person, have 2.4 children, a dog and a dog and a picket fence, all of that. And I call it the Disneyfication of love and romance. Would you say that women have come up against the Disneyfication of that? More women are, or would you say that in your experience? I mean, you're also talking to different groups of women in your research, but I'm seeing that women are still feeling that pressure and to follow that life trajectory. And if they don't find their Prince Charming by a certain age, that Disney palace starts to crumble for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the Disneyfication is a good way to put it, but I think that poor Disney gets quite a lot of blame kind of left at its door. But I think that it's from everywhere you look in society, we're being told there is one way that a life should be, or certainly like this is how life looks. And also, if you think generationally, you know, we look to our parents, and most people have two parents, not everyone, obviously, or at least have had two parents, and there's then problems maybe have come from just having one parent. So you do think like that's just the way that life goes. And I am hopeful, because I
Eve, are you with us? I lost you for a bit.
I am. Yeah, sorry.
Can we pick up from the beginning of that question when we were talking about the Disneyfication of love and romance?
Yeah, sorry, it's my internet. Let me just...
Oh, yeah. You said you think Disney gets a bad rap if you... Are you with me, Eve? I think your internet's gone down. Hi, Eve. Are you back with us?
I am. I'm sorry.
No,
my internet in this apartment is terrible.
No problem.
You can hear me okay?
I can hear you okay. So you can just leap back into the answer to that question where I asked you about the Disneyfication of love and romance, and then you said Disney gets a bad rap.
Yeah. So I think that Disney gets quite a bad rap here. A lot of blame is at its door. And obviously, yes, that is part of it. But I think everywhere that you look in society, you're told that life looks like meeting somebody, being with them, having children. That's it. And obviously, I think now that the opportunities for women are so more vast, career kind of sits alongside that. But I think that's what seems to have happened, and a lot of like kind of modern feminist literature talks about this, is that it's a double-edged sword, because you've got, with the kind of increase in career and professional opportunities for women, we haven't had an increase in men taking on domestic responsibilities. So women are still doing the lion's share of domestic responsibilities and childcare, but they're also now doing a lot in the workplace as well, a lot more than they ever have done before. And so rather than it kind of being, okay, well, it's one or the other, there's still that societal pressure to have a family and be present in the family, and that kind of maternal guilt that mums know very well, that's all to do with spending too much time away from the home. But then you also have the pressure of career. So we're at, I believe, quite a worrying place. And so it's not surprising that more and more women are suffering mental health problems and suffering burnout. And so I think, I don't know what the answer is to that, really, apart from, I don't know if it's governmental measures or kind of widespread campaigns to get men to be more present in the home. I mean, shared parental leave is one easy way to start that. So actually, yeah, I think that it's brilliant that we see more and more women with much broader horizons. But we do know that more and more women are choosing not to have children or to just have one child. But I don't know whether the same is kind of the women who are child free are also kind of neglecting those responsibilities in the domestic space as well, or whether it's just the childcare that they're opting out of.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. And look, we're having this conversation, and I was reading your book against the coverage of Erica Kirk's Women's Leadership Summit last weekend. It's wild. I don't want to harp too much on it, but it does feel like we're a little bit in the twilight zone, that we're definitely on one extreme of feminism, or the other extreme. And it's largely a US issue, but I feel like it does filter down societally to the rest of the third world, which looks up to the US for whatever reason, and picks up on their kind of pop culture dynamics. So we are kind of stuck, and I do feel like that we're not looking at enough of the nuance, which I feel like, even though you're coming from a very particular lens of being in a heteronormative relationship and having your heart broken in this way, the journalistic side of you really took over, and the book gives a lot of nuance and offers a lot of alternative stories that give kind of an overarching view of, quote unquote, what to do when the life you planned is fucked up, right?
Yeah, that's pretty much what it is. I mean, in the book, I also look at women who have chosen to do something completely different. So women who have lived in female communes, which was a huge trend in the 1970s in the UK, and there's still some that exist today. And it's not like in these communes, it's not the case that men are banned or it's not anti-men, but it's just the acknowledgement that when women are together in a space, they tend to live quite peacefully and help each other.
That was a wild story, and pun unintended, but because you speak about the wild family, and for those who want to know more about it, Eve's coverage in the book is quite fascinating. And so there's the wild family that was kind of the original commune that cropped up in the 1970s of women. But throughout the book, again, it's just another thread that women lean on other women, and you had an initial group of girlfriends that you leaned on, and then you had a subsequent group of women that you gathered, a tribe that you created, largely composed of women that you could lean on who knew exactly what you were going through. I love.
Yeah, it was quite I don't know, like spirited thing that I ended up in New York, and then suddenly I was surrounded by loads of women who were divorced and for the first time in my life. And it's not like I had like gone out with a banner or anything, or I had it tattooed on my forehead. But for some reason, the women that I attracted seemed to be women who were around my kind of life stage, and also had either been divorced or just broken up from a very long-term committed relationship. And there was something really healing in that, because it really did feel like, firstly, you felt like you weren't a freak. Like there was a part of me that thought, I'm divorced in at 30, there must be something wrong with me. Everyone's going to think that there's something the matter with me. And it made me realize that actually it's not that uncommon. And also just having somebody who understood the nuances, the kind of unique heartbreak of that romantic split. Because I think with a divorce, you really are grieving the future that you thought you had. You really are, and there's the added kind of upset of an embarrassment and shame of the fact that you stood in front of all the people that you love in the world and committed your life to a person, and that person has then gone and stabbed you in the back. And it's very, very easy to sort of tell yourself that you're a terrible judge of character, and that you're very bad at that you're very bad at spotting red flags. And I think that having somebody else who understands that deeply can be really healing, and just make you feel like you're normal and you're not alone, and that everything that you're experiencing is totally natural.
I love that your girlfriends, among other things, gave you like playlists to mourn over, and were there in terms of supports. And you open one chapter called The Man, quite appropriately called The Man, which speaks to one man's kind of experience of it that you really wanted to delve into to kind of give the other side of the story. But you open it up with, there's a song that really hit home. Why Mr. Perfectly Fine? Why was that the one that resonated for you, number one, of the Taylor Swift playlists that your friends threw at you out of all of her Heartbreak? Why that song? And I'm assuming it was pre the Tortured Poets Department, which comes with a whole lot of other fodder to throw at kind of the anger that you might feel in that moment. So is there something else or another artist that you go, actually, that's the song, that's the angry song that I would delve into?
I have to say, when I first listened to the Tortured Poets, I was like, this is a year too late. If it had come
Yes.
a year earlier. But it probably would have been terrible, because I would have been an emotional wreck on every tube platform in London. But yes, Mr. Perfectly Fine. I think something that I found really difficult, like I kind of said previously, that there was this change in my ex's attitude that I found really disturbing, because he was like a person that I didn't recognize. And when it came to all the kind of financial dealings with our split, and furniture and everything else like that, he became very cold and very objective, and spoke to me like I was a colleague. And the kind of inference that I got from his communication was, I'm fine. And yes, this seismic event has happened. And yes, I've blown my whole life open. And the person who I swore that I would love forever, I actually meant 6 months. But I'm going to get a new apartment. I've already found it. I want to sort out our finances now. I am ready to sell our house within a week. I've already divvied up the kind of mementos of our entire life together and decided what I want and what I don't want. And fine to kiss goodbye to a big box of memories that we've kept for the past decade. And I just couldn't wrap my head around it. And I wasn't alone, because, also everyone who had sat at our wedding and heard us speak to each other in the way that we did threw questions at me and I think the most frustrating thing was I kept being presented with these questions that I didn't have the answers to. And I think you often feel like you owe people answers, but I didn't have them. And so in the Taylor Swift song, Miss Perfectly Fine, can't remember what album it's on, one of the earlier ones. Mm-hmm. She talks about this idea that, I'm really struggling and barely able to get out of bed, and yet you are perfectly fine. You're getting on with your life. You're maybe going on dates. You're maybe going to bars. You're meeting other people. You can see this horizon for you. And I one thing that I really took from all of the women that I met who had told me about their breakups was that this was very common, that the man seemed to sort of, okay, right, what's next? And the woman was stuck in this pit of despair for months, if not years, and never really able to recover or get over it. And I think I put this in the book. A kind of example of this is, and obviously this is all anecdote, so statistically, who knows what's actually true, but this is just from my experience. And I always remember, so my father died when I was a teenager. I was 12, just about to turn 13. And my mother tried to sort of get on with her life within, a few years after his death. And that involved being set up with people. Friends would set her up with people, whatever. And she really didn't want to and found it really uncomfortable and awful, but she told herself that she had to. And I always remember her telling me about this one support group she went to for people who had lost a spouse relatively young. And it was all women apart from one man. And she said that all of the women there said that they were all within about 2 years of losing their partner, or all had male partners who had died. And none of the women there had met anyone else. And the only man that was there talked about his girlfriend, who he had met within 3 or 4 months of his wife dying. And that's no judgment, and not to say that there's anything kind of, there's any weight to that at all. But I just thought, how interesting. And it seems like it's a phenomena that Taylor Swift is also interested in. So if she wants to call me to talk about it, I'm always available.
If she does, can I be there? I'd love to have a discussion.
Sure.
Three-way chat about this. I feel like there's this when people move on very quickly, and it's almost always the man that moves on very quickly, that they say, especially after a spouse has passed away, so this is not necessarily pertaining to divorce, that the happier the marriage, the quicker the spouse moves on. But this was almost always only true when it was the man that moved on. When the woman moved on really quickly, it was like, how dare she? She's not yet over him. And then if it was the man that moved on, it's because his wife was so good to him. And it's so genderized, as we do with everything. And I do think that even though your book isn't about gender wars, it is called What She Did Next. It unpacks the female experience of being blindsided. And there is this tension in the book. And so, I mean, you're writing part memoir, so I run the risk of stepping on your toes here. But from a reader's perspective, I also wondered perhaps if throughout the relationship, your ex was Mr. Perfectly Fine in other ways. He was the very supportive spouse. You were very open, both in your book and in your social media, about your eating disorder, which he was there for throughout. He was there when you were hospitalized. This was before you got married, as I understand it. And he was there through a very traumatic, trialing time in your life, and a real pillar of support throughout your relationship. So then I wonder if then, when it was kind of, maybe if you saw it as his turn to have a moment when he decided to break off the marriage. And I'm really just oversimplifying here, but I wonder if his support throughout your eating disorder, he kind of played that Mr. Perfectly Fine, that Mr. Nice Guy trope, and then that's a belief that he held of himself. And this is not to personally attack that one single person. I'm just trying to see, kind of also puzzle together, as you do throughout the book, of how to make sense of these things that happen, and how a person that you love so much can treat you with such coldness. You know, I don't know whether you have anything to say on that, because you are very open about your eating disorder. So then that would be something of a quote unquote flaw or a fault, which he helped you through. Out of the partnership, you were the weaker of the two. And I feel like societally we forget to see that people are made up of multitudes, and that you're not necessarily the weaker in the relationship of two. And it wasn't always going to be like that if your marriage did work out. But he ended up coming across as someone who didn't break you or hurt you, because he was always Mr. Nice Guy. Am I wrong in that assertion?
No, not at all. That's exactly correct. I think that our relationship now, obviously after a long period of therapy, I think it was very complicated in that, yes, as you said, I was hospitalized with an eating disorder in my early 20s. We'd only been dating for about a year, maybe a year and a half. And we were young. We were 22, 23, didn't have the tools to communicate about this really traumatic thing that was happening to us both. Knew that we loved each other very much, but actually something much bigger than the relationship was going on. And I don't think that we had the words to really help each other understand how each one of us was feeling. And I think that, you know, people talk about trauma bonding, and I think that it was a perfect example of it. And it's very easy to see something like that as an event that will bond you for life. And in many ways it will. However, you know, a relationship isn't always that emotionally heightened, or it shouldn't be that emotionally heightened always. And I think that the problem with having those stakes so high so early on, and this kind of real emotional gravity to your relationship, is that everything kind of becomes a bit like that, and you almost pride yourself on this really deep connection, which for some people I'm sure will work very well. But I think that for us, it almost it made it very heavy. It made everything quite heavy, and it also really defined roles quite early on. And I think part of that was because, like I said, we weren't very good at communicating, and I'll hold my hands up, I was part of that as well. He was from a family of men, certainly, who do not talk about their feelings. It's very classic. And so wasn't, before he met me, had never really spoken about how he felt about anything. And also he had some confidence issues, and was at the point of life where he was figuring out where he was and who he was. And at that point, you know, this huge thing comes along and says, okay, well, your role is to be the carer and to be the strong one and to look out for this person who you love, who can't be trusted, who, you know, needs to be minded in some ways. And I think he really took on that responsibility. And to be honest, it was only true for probably a couple of weeks when I was really at my sickest. But very quickly, I was looked after by a team of very well-respected medical professionals who were extremely capable. Also had my mum. And I think because he was at a point of his life where maybe his sense of self wasn't very strong, that role became very defining for him. Which in turn meant that my role was the looked after one, which really is not within my personality. So I think that we kind of struggled through this very defined dynamic for many years, which felt uncomfortable for both of us. But we didn't really have the tools or resources to be able to pick that apart and understand why maybe we had kind of got ourselves into this box too quickly. And I think that what that did was kind of pick away at intimacy and pick away at physical connection and fun and, silliness in a relationship. And all of those things that were and are such a huge part of my personality, but the eating disorder kind of clouded for quite a long time. And I think that that's probably one reason why a lot of both of us, our true selves were shelved for a time. And I was very interested in having some couples therapy, and that wasn't something that he felt comfortable doing. And I do often wonder whether if we had really good couples therapy specifically about this period of time, and how it changed our relationship, whether the outcome may have been different.
Yeah, that would be so interesting to see, because I think that those roles that you speak about do foster a lot of resentment. And you never know. I mean, you do speak in the book a lot about just not knowing. You never know how things might turn out. It would be really, I mean, if we had a magic crystal ball, would therapy help in that respect? But he was not interested in therapy. And I think that...
No, he wasn't.
Yeah, so you bring up a lot of that kind of nuance. And I think there's about 20 women you mention in the book that you've interviewed. And some of those are just... I was totally blindsided. You deal with that blindside. You deep dive into affairs from either party, and you look at this inexplicable heart sore. But then, crucially for me, as another facet of the book is financial dependence, and how you call it that marriage is the total fuckery that is marriage, the financial fuckery that is marriage. And I think that really is something crucial that we do need to speak about, is the financial dependence that a woman typically has on a man. Obviously, the roles can be reversed, talking about roles now. And when you look at the more religion-based marriages, like particularly the chapter regarding the Islam faith, it's very, you cover it so beautifully, without kind of picking apart any one religion or another. But a lot of the women in that there was one fascinating woman who was financially independent and really strong. And a lot of the women in your book also, that either they come into a marriage with nothing and they're financially dependent on the man the whole time, or they come into a marriage and it's legislation, not religion. It's legislation largely that screws them in the long run when it comes to the divorce or being financially dependent on the man. So there's a lot that I'm throwing at you, but there's so much nuance to financial dependence, but almost always a woman comes off second best. Is that right?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. I mean, obviously there are the exceptions to the rule, but I think there's sort of two things going on here. I mean, the one overarching thing to bear in mind, and obviously this varies based on which jurisdiction you're in, but mostly if you get married, in the eyes of the law, your assets are split 50-50. So, and that is very much depending on lots of different factors. But generally speaking, when you sign a marriage contract, you are saying, if you don't have anything else in writing, like a prenup, you are saying half of what is mine is yours. And the problem with that there's many problems with that. But one problem is that often what happens is, and people aren't aware, that any financial gain that might come into the marriage from maybe family, if it comes from the family of one party, it doesn't necessarily mean that it stays with that party should you divorce. It's actually seen as a gift and therefore part of the marriage. So it means that if you do divorce, your partner could walk away with a substantial amount of money that's come from your family, and there wouldn't really be anything that you could do to argue against that. There's also, I think for women specifically, it's very difficult because women traditionally take up more of the childcare responsibilities, which means that financially, if in the case of divorce, financially they have more of a burden. And so of course you have alimony and, a father might pay payments, but that's not the same as taking on the lion's share of the childcare, because that involves having to give up work potentially, or having to certainly limit your career aspirations because you have to take childcare into consideration. So I think there's statistics that show in the 3 years after divorce, women are something like pounds, like £60,000 worse off. So you have that, traditionally the man can kind of already, because of societal gender differences and discrimination, you have a situation where a man is more likely to do better in his career and gain more money and earn more money. And then once you put divorce and the kind of childcare discrepancies into the mix, women suffer even more. And on top of that, it's often the case that women have taken a lot of time off work to look after babies. Women have contributed more to the house in terms of making it look great, making it more sellable, making it, and all of these kind of unseen benefits to a marriage that then they have the potential to lose. And so that's kind of like one aspect. But I guess the biggest lesson that I think I've learned is that what we're seeing now is more and more women are earning more money, and more women are becoming the breadwinners of their family. And it's taken a long time for women to get here. And not only that, but as I discussed before, women are also still taking on the lion's share of the domestic responsibilities and childcare. So there's this double burden that women are carrying. And still in divorce, there's this 50-50 rule. So it means that as a woman, you could have worked your absolute arse off against all odds, smashed that glass ceiling, however, whatever you had to do it, which the likelihood is it was much more difficult than it would have been if you were male. And you finally got yourself in this position where you're earning a decent salary and you are perhaps the breadwinner at the same time as raising your children, looking after your kids, doing the lion's share of all of the stuff around the house. And then your partner can say, actually, I want a divorce. And if you are the breadwinner and have the lion's share of the savings, etc., you then have to give some of that away. And I find that is just a real kick in the guts. And so my message, which I hope can be taken from the book, to women, especially women who see themselves as ambitious and somebody who has, quote unquote, shit to do and want to be in a high earning position, my message is always to protect yourself first, because you never know what's going to happen. And you could be married to the nice guy who you think would never in a million years do anything to hurt you. And actually that doesn't turn out to be the case, because you never know what the future holds. And the most important thing is that the financial gain that you have worked very, very hard to get is protected and is yours. And I think that message isn't heard enough. And I think there's also an assumption that divorce always favors women. Because this idea that, well, women will be the ones with the children, and so they'll be the ones to keep the house because the children live in the house. And actually, in the long term, divorce pretty much sucks for women because they might keep the house, but they have all of the responsibility that goes along with the house and the children, and they're cutting their earning potential in half because they're not able to work as much as now really a single dad would be able to. So it's such a kind of world of complications, but really important to protect yourself.
So Eve, I've been banging on about financial independence for women for the greatest amount of time. I've had arguments with friends who say that I'm living out of fear. We've had an argument on our sister podcast, or a robust discussion on our sister podcast, The Great Equalizer, about trad wives and that whole tradition. These are things that, as a feminist, I'm really passionate about. And my one fear, I have to say, that comes out of your book, What She Did Next, is that women are only going to be reading it once it's too late. And so one thing I want to urge is for readers, listeners, viewers, is to pick up the book no matter what stage of a relationship you're at, whether you're in a relationship or not, whether you're single or spoken for, whether you want children or not. I think if you're a woman at any point and at any age, the sooner the better, maybe pick up a copy of this book and safeguard yourself, because you never know. You just don't know. And I think a lot of the anecdotes out of this book will show you that so many women think that they've reached their happily ever after, and they get blindsided for whatever reason it may be. Eve, we've earmarked an extract, and I think now would be maybe an appropriate time to pick up on that. So contextualize it for us, because Rebecca seemed to me to be the one that really, I mean, a lot of women in the book, and you yourself even feel like you hit rock bottom at a certain stage. At one point, Rebecca said to you that, yes, she did hit rock bottom, but I feel like her response to you, which you wrote down, was quite surprising, and I really enjoyed the final message of that. So if you have any further context for the passage, otherwise you can get straight into it.
Yeah, of course. So some context is that Rebecca is actually a friend of mine who is in her mid-40s, and she has 3 children, now all teenagers. She got married very young, in her early 20s, and had children very young, and ended up getting divorced after about 4 or 5 years, I think. And she was unhappy from the very beginning, but young, and, you know, like many women seeking that happily ever after, but always knew that this man wasn't really the man for her. And what transpired in the divorce is similar to mine. He became somewhat of a different person, was very cutthroat about finances, and she was left. She didn't have much of a career, because she had spent the whole time in the marriage being the homemaker and looking after the 3 children, while he kind of progressed in his career and made more money, increased his earning potential. And so, like many women, she was in this position where suddenly she was stuck with a mortgage that she couldn't pay, and the utilities, and also the kind of financial doom that comes with looking after 3 young children. And she said to me, and I remember kind of thinking how lucky I was that I was in a position where at least I didn't have anyone that I was responsible for. It was just me I had to worry about. And she was so inspiring, because she's since kind of gone on to coach other divorced women. And she really was at the point where she had nothing, and described these terrible, terrible incidents where bailiffs would come to knock at the door for bills that she hadn't paid. And she said she would have to just double bolt the door and sit on the floor crying with her children. And that thought just felt to me like something that you could never recover from, and that the kids would be scarred for life. And, you know, how could you watch your mother go through something so horrific and still be a quote unquote normal, kind of happy, functioning child? And she now, sort of 10 years on or whatever, she is just such an inspiring person to talk to, because she has created this life for herself and her children that is so wonderful and full of love and full of happiness, and also full of accepting that things don't always go to plan, and strength. And that's kind of, you know, where we meet her here in the story, where she's telling me how the divorce actually made her stronger. So the idea of finding yourself divorced with 3 kids at 27 might sound like the definition of hell for many women who don't have buckets of cash to cushion them from disaster. But Rebecca says it made her feel like Teflon. When it's all over, you feel fucking invincible. I remember there was one point where it was literally like being hit in the face with a brick wall over and over again, and each time having to get up and try again. And this was true despite the fact I was the one who made the decision. But with the living nightmare came liberation from the hopes and dreams that she says, in hindsight, had kept her trapped. We all buy into the fallacy of what a future should look like. 2 parents, 2 children, laughter at the dinner table, but it's bullshit. Even if you're in a solid relationship, you truly have no idea what's going to happen. And bursting that bubble for me has been massively liberating. It forces you to think that whatever situation you're in might not be forever, and that's okay. Instead, I am much more focused on what things look like today, at this moment. I enjoy what it is right now, because who knows what's going to come tomorrow. And I just want to read another bit from her where she talks about where she's at kind of now.
Absolutely.
Eventually.
Mm-hmm.
Let me just find it. Oh, here it is. So she's since married again to a man who also has children. And her ex-husband has also married again to somebody who has children. So there's lots of children in the picture. So she says, Rebecca's youngest daughter celebrated her 12th birthday last year with a family for all the party. She says, I do this thing where I invite everyone, my new wife, his sister. I do this thing where I invite everyone, my ex's new wife, his sister, the sister's family, his mother, Jack's mum, and his siblings. I stood back and watched everyone dancing together and thought, look at the love I have brought into my children's lives. Everyone told me divorce would destroy them. I laughed and thought, what bullshit. And I just really loved that, because it personified that, you know, life might look differently to how you thought it would look, but there's no one says that it's got to be worse.
Eve, there's so much more that we can touch on. I mean, I think we could go to length to say what Taylor Swift should have in her prenup, and that she should have a prenup in the first place. She's either married now and it's too late, or she's about to be, and we can get in there maybe during our discussion of Mr. Perfectly Fine, if we're fast enough, I think.
I'm pretty sure I have faith in Swifties. I think she's got a prenup.
The Swifties would not let her not have a prenup, I don't think.
Right.
Look, your book, What She Did Next, is brimming with advice. It is also really tenderly told. You're very generous with your own story, which I think is powerful, but it is not he said, she said. It is not a man-bashing book about divorce and what men do to us. It is nuanced, it is well-researched, it is up-to-date, and it is really, as I mentioned in the very beginning, that group chat with girlfriends that also is extremely informative about not just marriage and divorce, but relationships. And I do think if any of you still haven't gotten hold of it, please get a hold of it. It is at any major bookstore in the country. Eve, it's been a pleasure to have you on Current Read. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you, because you are a writer, this is what you do, and I know that you've really been enjoying it in Cape Town on mat leave, but I also know people like you, and there must be something that the cogs are turning. Is there anything that you're working on next that we can look forward to?
I have some things that I want to do, yes. I have a Substack which I'm often updating, but I would like to try and get a fiction project underway.
Lovely.
So that's my next challenge, but it's easier said than done, especially with a 1-year-old.
Oh, of course. No, there's a 1-year-old in the picture, so you have all the grace in the world, and I have all the patience in the world. And for those of you who have read What She Did Next and want more, obviously Eve's Substack is the way to go. Eve, you did all the hard work of going through every Diary of a CEO episode ever and coming at the health BS advice that he gives. And I say this hoping that his team doesn't come after me. I'm just a small little podcast. But you're really doing the hard yards. You're doing the good job for women. And I think their health as a whole, women's health, and looking at it from a holistic point of view. And so I will be putting our listeners and viewers in touch with your Substack as well. Eve Simmons, it's been such a pleasure. And when I'm in London, I will call you up and stalk you. Because I'd love to meet face to face. I would love it. I think we have lots and lots to chat about, in addition to Mr. Perfectly Fine. Thanks once again for joining me on Current Read.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been lovely.